Hello there, and welcome back. I'm glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe your day was long, maybe your mind is still moving around too much, or maybe you just like falling asleep while wandering through strange stories, old mysteries, and the kind of theories that refuse to stay buried. Either way, there is nothing you need to solve right now. Let your shoulders loosen, let your breathing settle, and let the room around you grow a little quieter. Tonight, we are stepping into one of the strangest corners of horror game history. A place of flickering cameras, broken animatronics, missing children, purple shadows, family tragedies, haunted restaurants, and arguments that have lasted for years. We are going through the most controversial Five Nights at Freddy's theories ever. Not just the theories that were popular for a week, or the ones that made a good thumbnail and then faded away, but the ones that split the community, changed how people read the story, made people re-watch old minigames frame by frame, and sometimes made everyone question whether the answer had been obvious or impossible all along. Some of these theories are probably wrong, some are partly right. Some may have been right for one chapter of the franchise and wrong after the story changed shape, and some are still floating in that strange FNAF space where every clue feels important, every contradiction feels deliberate, and even a tiny detail on a wall can start a war. Before we begin, if these calm dives into dark little mysteries help you unwind, relax, or find a quiet way to end the day, consider liking and subscribing. It helps more people find their way into these stories too. Dita one sleepy night at a time, and now let the lights dim. Let the office fan hum softly in the background, and let us begin with the theory that once tried to explain almost everything. For a long time, dream theory was one of the biggest and most divisive ideas in the entire Five Nights at Freddy's community. The basic idea was that the early games, especially the first 4, were not literal events in the way people first assumed, but nightmares or distorted memories belonging to the crying child from Five Nights at Freddy's 4. Under this reading, the strange details scattered across the 4th game were not just callbacks, they were explanations. The toy phone, the miniature animatronics, the child-sized bedroom, the hospital imagery, the distorted versions of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Fredbear. All of it seemed to suggest that the franchise's earlier horrors were being filtered through a frightened child's mind. The reason dream theory became so controversial is that it was both elegant and infuriating. On one hand, it explained why Five Nights at Freddy's 4 was filled with small objects that looked like echoes of the first games. A toy phone could become Phone Guy. A tiny plastic Chica missing her beak could become evidence that the toy animatronics were imagined from bedroom toys. The purple shadows and strange minigame symbolism could be read as a child's attempt to process trauma through nightmare logic. Suddenly, the entire franchise seemed to fold inward, as if the restaurants, the animatronics, and the murders were all part of one dying child's dream. On the other hand, dream theory felt like it threatened the reality of everything people had invested in. If the story was only a dream, then what happened to the missing children? What happened to the security guards? What happened to the newspapers, the paycheck, the hidden mini-games, and all the slow detective work that made the series feel alive? Fans did not want years of theorizing reduced to a hospital bed twist. The theory felt too clean to some people, and too destructive to others. It solved many details by dissolving them, and that is always dangerous in a mystery story. A solution that says almost everything is symbolic can explain nearly anything, but it can also make evidence feel slippery. What made dream theory even more controversial was the feeling that it may have been close to the intended answer at one point. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 was originally presented as the final chapter. It was full of clues that seemed to ask people to rethink the entire story. The famous phrase about the pieces being put together, the box that remained locked, and the attention placed on tiny repeated objects all gave dream theory a strange power. Even fans who hated it often had to admit it was not random. It was responding to real clues. The argument became less about whether the theory was clever and more about whether the franchise had later moved away from it. That is one of the quiet truths about FNAF controversy. Sometimes the fight is not only over what is true now, it is over what may have been true before the story expanded. FNAF is a series that grew in public, with fan reactions, sequels, books, spin-offs, and retcons all shaping how people look back at old evidence. Dream theory sits right in the middle of that discomfort. It feels like a ghost of an answer from an earlier version of the story, still walking through the halls long after the doors changed. The next controversy follows almost naturally from Five Nights at Freddy's 4, because the identity of the crying child became one of the deepest arguments in the franchise. The crying child is central to the emotional machinery of that game. He is bullied by his older brother, frightened by Fredbear's family diner, followed by plush toys, warned by a strange Fredbear plush, and finally bitten during his birthday party. The question was simple on the surface. Who does this child become? But in FNAF, simple questions almost never stay simple. Later, some fans argued that the crying child became Golden Freddy. The logic was emotional and visual. Fredbear was the animatronic that caused the bite. Golden Freddy was connected to Fredbear, and the crying child's story ended with a promise that he would be put back together. If a child died because of Fredbear, perhaps his spirit attached to Fredbear. This made the crying child part of one of the most mysterious characters in the whole series, a ghostly golden figure that could crash the game, appear as an impossible hallucination, and seem more powerful than the others. Other fans argued that the crying child became nobody in the direct possession sense. Under this reading, his importance was not that he became one animatronic, but that his death shaped Michael Afton, William Afton, and the entire family tragedy. The bite was the wound that broke the Afton household. The older brother's guilt became Michael's motivation. William's response to death and loss may have deepened his obsession with remnant, control, and the boundary between life and death. The crying child became the emotional center without needing to become Golden Freddy. Then came theories that tried to blend the two, especially the idea that Golden Freddy might contain more than one spirit. If Cassidy was the angry spirit and the crying child was also connected to Golden Freddy, then the strange power and instability of Golden Freddy could be explained through a shared haunting. This became known in different forms as a two-soul idea, and it remains one of the most debated interpretations because it tries to honour several clues at once. It gives Cassidy the vengeance often associated with Golden Freddy, while still giving the crying child a place in the larger supernatural puzzle. The controversy here comes from the fact that FNAF often gives emotional clues and mechanical clues that do not line up perfectly. The crying child feels important enough to become something, but the missing children's incident already gives Golden Freddy a likely victim. The logbook seems to involve multiple voices, including one asking questions and another answering in altered text. Phrases like, "It was me," the name Cassidy, the altered responses, the repeated birthday imagery, and the mysterious final scene of Five Nights at Freddy's, for all pull fans in different directions. Each theory can explain part of the evidence. None can make every piece lie down quietly. Golden Freddy's identity is probably the most famous example of this problem. For years, Golden Freddy was less a character than a haunting presence. In the first game, he appears as a strange limp suit, almost like a hallucination. In the second game, his giant head can appear in the hallway, and he seems tied to deeper hidden lore. The minigames connect golden suits to murders, old restaurants, and the death of children. Later material introduces names, vengeful spirits, and different versions of Fredbear. The result is a character who feels central while remaining strangely undefined. Cassidy became the most widely accepted name connected to Golden Freddy because of the survival logbook puzzle, where hidden text and altered letters led fans toward that name. Cassidy, as the fifth missing child, fit the structure of the original murder story. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy each had a victim. It was clean in the way FNAF rarely is, but controversy did not end there, because Ultimate Custom Night introduced the idea of a spirit called the One You Should Not Have Killed, and fans began arguing over whether that spirit was Cassidy, the crying child, Andrew from the books, or someone else entirely. Ultimate Custom Night made everything sharper because it presented itself like a personal punishment. William Afton, or someone like him, seemed trapped in an endless cycle of animatronic torment. The enemies taunted him. Old man consequences appeared. Golden Freddy twitched in darkness. Lines of dialogue suggested a child refusing to let go. If Cassidy was that spirit, then Golden Freddy became the final jailer of William Afton. But the books complicated the picture by introducing Andrew, a furious child attached to Afton in a way that resembled the vengeful spirit role. Suddenly the debate was not only who Golden Freddy was, it became whether the games were borrowing book concepts, matching book continuity, or running parallel versions of the same idea. The Andrew versus Cassidy debate is controversial because it touches a bigger wound in the franchise. How much do the books count? Some fans prefer Cassidy as the vengeful spirit because the name came from a game-connected puzzle, and because Golden Freddy's imagery in Ultimate Custom Night feels extremely direct. Other fans see Andrew as a better fit because the Fazbear Fright stories contain a child whose rage keeps Afton suffering beyond death, which feels very close to the purpose of Ultimate Custom Night. The argument is not just about one name, it is about what kind of evidence has authority in FNAF. That brings us to one of the loudest modern controversies: whether the Fazbear Fright stories are in the same continuity as the games, partly in continuity, or only parallels. For some, Stitchline Games became a powerful theory. It argued that the epilogues and connected stories from Fazbear Frights were not just symbolic parallels but part of the game timeline, at least the parts connected by the Stitch Wraith narrative. This would mean characters like Andrew and Jake were not merely alternate universe examples, they would be directly relevant to the main story. The appeal of Stitchline Games is that it gives structure to a messy period of lore. Fazbear Frights explains agony, the haunted objects, Afton's lingering evil, and the strange aftermath of burned remains. The Stitchwraith epilogues connect multiple stories into one ongoing supernatural investigation. If those events are in the game continuity, then the franchise suddenly has a hidden bridge between the older Afton era and the newer world of haunted technology, agony, and corporate resurrection. It also gives Ultimate Custom Night a possible explanation through Andrew's rage and Afton's continuing suffering. The controversy is intense because the books often feel both connected and disconnected. Some stories are bizarre in ways that seem hard to fit cleanly into the games. Some details match familiar concepts, while others introduce situations that feel like nightmare reflections of game ideas rather than literal events. A child gets pulled into a ball pit that seems to connect to the past. A man is haunted by Spring Bonnie imagery. Objects carry suffering. Fazbear Entertainment's shadow stretches into strange corners of everyday life. It all feels like FNAF, but whether it is the same FNAF is where the argument begins. A similar but even more modern controversy surrounds Tales from the Pizzaplex. These stories are tied closely to security breach imagery, Pizzaplex locations, and characters connected to the Mimic. Many fans argue that Tales is much more directly connected to the games than Fazbear Frights, especially because the Mimic became central to the modern era. The abandoned attractions, the corporate experiments, the EI behaviour, the old endoskeleton that learns by imitation, and the Pizzaplex setting all seem too aligned with the games to ignore. For those fans, Tales games is almost necessary if the Mimic is to be understood clearly. But the resistance is also understandable. Many fans entered FNAF through the aims, and feel frustrated when major answers seem to sit inside books instead. If a game mystery requires reading multiple novel collections to understand who the villain is, some people feel the storytelling has become unfair. Others argue that the books are not homework but extra windows, giving deeper context without replacing the games. The controversy reveals a real tension in modern FNAF. The story is bigger than one medium now, but not everyone agrees on how much power each medium should have. The Mimic itself became one of the most controversial modern answers because it rewired how people understood Glitchtrap, Burntrap, and the post-Afton era. For years, many fans believed William Afton had returned again through code, circuit boards, digital possession, or some strange remnant-infused technology. Glitchtrap looked like a golden rabbit. Burntrap looked like a decayed Springtrap-like body. The phrase always comes back hovered over everything. It felt natural, maybe even too natural, to assume that Afton was back once more. Then the Mimic changed the tone. Instead of William himself returning, the modern villain could be an endoskeleton, and its infected software copying Afton-like behaviour. The Mimic does not need to be William to act like him. It can imitate. It can wear costumes. It can repeat patterns of violence. And it can become a rabbit because rabbit imagery is part of the data it learned. This theory, later strengthened by official modern material centered on the Mimic, was controversial because it replaced a familiar evil with an echo of evil. For some fans, that was brilliant. For others, it felt like the story pulled Afton away after making his return seem obvious. The Afton versus Mimic debate is really a debate about legacy. Should the franchise keep William Afton as the central monster forever? A killer who refuses to die no matter how many fires, traps and endings try to erase him? Or should the newer story show that Fazbear Entertainment itself has become so corrupt and careless that it can recreate Afton's evil without needing Afton alive? The Mimic is scary in a different way. William is a murderer. The Mimic is a pattern. Izzy William kills because he chooses to. The Mimic kills because imitation, trauma and corporate misuse shape it into something monstrous. That difference changes the whole mood of the modern era. Burntrap sits at the centre of that argument like a burned statue nobody can agree on. At the end of Security Breach, the Afton-like figure appears beneath the Pizzaplex, connected to old ruins and surrounded by the remains of past disasters. Many players saw him and thought the answer was simple: Springtrap was back again. But later interpretations pushed toward the Mimic, especially after Ruin and the Tales material made the Mimic impossible to ignore. The question became whether Burntrap was literally Afton, the Mimic wearing Afton imagery, a body controlled by Mimic software, near a non-canon ending image that represented a path the story did not fully take. The controversy grew because Security Breach itself changed over time in the eyes of fans. Its endings, cut content, environmental clues, and later Ruin expansion made people reconsider what was real. The Princess Quest ending gained importance. The underground Burntrap ending became less secure. The Blob, later often called the Tangle in some contexts, raised questions about old animatronic remains. The Pizzaplex was built over buried history, but the exact relationship between old souls, old suits, new AI, and corporate cover-ups remained hazy. Modern FNAF did not simply answer the old mysteries, it built a new maze on top of them. Glitchtrap was controversial even before the Mimic became central. Is Help Wanted presented a digital rabbit figure that seemed to emerge from scanned circuit boards and interact with the player through virtual reality. If this was William Afton as code, then FNAF had moved from haunted metal into haunted software. That was already a big shift. If it was instead the Mimic program copying Afton's behaviour, then the fear became more technological. Not a ghost in the machine exactly, but a machine replaying the gestures of a ghost. Both readings have a certain elegance. Afton as Glitchtrap fits the franchise's long obsession with him returning. He becomes not only a killer in a suit, but an infection that can survive as data. The Mimic as Glitchtrap fits the newer theme of corporate negligence and imitation. Fazbear Entertainment scans old parts, reuses old material, where and accidentally lets a dangerous pattern loose inside a game. Either way, the company tries to turn horror into entertainment and ends up feeding the horror again. The disagreement comes from which monster sits at the heart of that mistake. Vanessa and Vanny became part of that same controversy. Was Vanessa possessed by Afton, manipulated by Glitchtrap, controlled by Mimic code, split into personalities, or trapped in a psychological struggle between herself and the rabbit persona? Security Breach presented pieces of that story but left enough gaps for argument. The therapy tapes, the emails from Special Delivery, the Vanny mask, the hidden rooms, the Princess Quest imagery, and the endings all point toward a woman being used by a force she cannot easily escape. But the exact mechanics remain debated, and in FNAF, and mechanics matter because possession, brainwashing, imitation, agony, and digital corruption all have different law consequences. The Princess Quest ending became controversial because it seemed to free Vanessa in a way that might be the true path forward. Gregory completes arcade games tied to a princess character, the dark influence is broken and Vanessa appears free. Later, Ruin strongly suggested that this route mattered because the Pizzaplex is ruined and Gregory is no longer simply trapped inside the mall. But fans still argue about the details. Is the princess Cassidy? Is the princess just Vanessa's trapped self? Is it a symbolic battle against Glitchtrap or a literal digital prison? The little arcade quest became a major battleground because in FNAF, even minigames can carry the weight of souls. Gregory himself became one of the most controversial modern characters because of the robot child theory. Gregbot argued that Gregory might not be an ordinary human boy, but a robotic recreation of the crying child or some other child connected to the Afton family. The theory drew from visual parallels, his mysterious background, his relationship with Freddy, the strange way he seems disconnected from ordinary records, and the franchise's history of robot children in the novel trilogy. The idea was dramatic. What if the modern protagonist was not just a runaway child, but another artificial echo of old trauma? Gregbot became controversial because it felt both fascinating and too much. FNAF already had robot children in the Charlie novels, where Henry builds versions of his daughter after losing her. Thus, if that concept entered the games directly, it would change how people read not only Gregory but possibly the crying child, the Afton family, and Security Breach's emotional centre. Some fans loved the possibility because it connected eras. Others disliked it because it made Gregory feel less like a scrappy survivor and more like another lore device. The debate also suffered from the problem of evidence that felt suggestive but not decisive. FNAF is very good at making coincidence look haunted. Gregory also became controversial because of his darker possible actions. Security Breach presents him as a child trying to survive, but later material and certain interpretations raise uncomfortable questions about whether he has done harmful things, whether he was under influence, or whether he has a hidden history connected to the same systems that controlled Vanessa. The more Gregory becomes tied to secret identities, hacking, the Mimic, and mysterious off-screen events, the more fans argue over whether he is innocent, manipulated, dangerous, or all three in different ways. FNAF rarely lets a child character remain simple for long. Glamrock Freddy's identity became another strangely heated debate. On the surface, he is one of the kindest animatronics in the franchise, a protector who helps Gregory survive the Pizzaplex. But fans quickly began asking why he was different. Why does he malfunction in a way that breaks him free from the system? Why does he speak with so much warmth? Why does he seem to have strange reactions in the underground ruins? And some argued that Glamrock Freddy might contain the spirit of Michael Afton, returning one last time as a guardian instead of a rotting corpse. The idea was emotionally powerful. Michael, who spent so long trying to undo his father's evil, could now protect a child from the new version of that evil. The Michael Glamrock Freddy theory became controversial because it was beautiful but difficult. It gave Freddy's kindness a deep reason, connecting the modern era to the old Afton tragedy. It made his line about friends being angry and confused under the Pizzaplex feel like a memory of the old animatronics. It turned him into a redeemed Michael figure, finally helping rather than surviving in horror. But others argued that this read too much into vague lines, and that Glamrock Freddy could simply be an AI whose personality, malfunction, And bond with Gregory allowed him to resist control. If every kind animatronic must contain a dead person, the modern story never gets to let machine characters become emotionally real on their own. The identity of Michael Afton himself was once one of the most controversial subjects in the franchise. Before sister location and later confirmations clarified much of his role, fans argued over which guards were Michael, whether Mike Schmidt from the first game was the same person as Michael Afton, and whether he was the older brother from Five Nights at Freddy's 4. The idea that one character had been moving through the series under different names gave the games a stronger emotional spine. It meant the player was not just surviving random night shifts, but following a guilty son as he searched through the ruins of his father's crimes. The Micah Bro, the theory that Michael Afton was the older brother who tormented the crying child, became widely accepted but was once fiercely debated. It explained why Michael would be haunted by guilt, why he might return to Freddy's locations, and why his story feels like punishment and repair. The older brother's prank at Fredbear's caused the bite that killed his little brother, or at least placed him in the hospital. If Michael then spent the rest of his life trying to undo William's horrors, his arc becomes a grim mirror of Arthurian penance in a much stranger world. A bully becoming a broken adult walking through haunted restaurants and underground facilities, looking for what can still be fixed. The opposing idea that Michael might be the crying child himself also had passionate support, because the phrase "I will put you back together" seemed to imply some kind of reconstruction. If the crying child was rebuilt, perhaps as a human-like robot or some remnant touch survivor, then he could become Michael later. This connected to the novel trilogy's robot child concepts, and gave the FNAF 4 child a direct role in later games. But it also created complications. Michael clearly speaks as someone who went to find Elizabeth in sister location, survives being scooped, and has a body that decays. The exact biological and mechanical implications became difficult to manage. The Bite of 87 versus Bite of 83 debate is another classic controversy, and it shows how one date can haunt an entire franchise. In the first game, Phone Guy mentions the Bite of 87, when someone lost the frontal lobe and somehow survived. Then, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 shows a child being bitten by Fredbear in what later evidence places in 1983. Early on, many fans assumed the bite in FNAF 4 must be the famous Bite of 87. It had a child, a stage, an animatronic mouth, and a catastrophic injury. It looked like the answer everyone had waited for. But the television Easter egg and other context pointed toward 1983, creating a split. If FNAF 4 showed the Bite of 83, then the Bite of 87 remained a separate event, likely connected to the toy animatronics and the daytime incident mentioned around FNAF 2. This was controversial because fans had to let go of what looked like an obvious reveal. It also meant the franchise had at least 2 major bite incidents, which some found messy while others found fitting for a company as cursed as Fazbear Entertainment. The difference between 83 and 87 became more than trivia. It determined which animatronic caused which tragedy, and how the timeline should be arranged. The Bite of 87 itself remains controversial because the culprit is still debated. Mangle has long been a popular suspect. The way Mangle hangs from the ceiling, lunges toward the player's head, and has a broken, sharp-mouthed design makes it easy to imagine that animatronic causing a frontal lobe injury. Toy Chica, Toy Bonnie, and even other toy animatronics have been discussed too. The key clue is that the toys were apparently scrapped after the FNAF 2 location closed, and daytime use of the animatronics was restricted after the bite. Since the Wizards were being kept away from guests, the toys seem likely. But FNAF rarely gives the satisfying security footage people want. The bite debates are controversial because FNAF turns absence into obsession. A single line from Phone Guy created years of speculation. When a later game showed a bite, fans understandably wanted it to be the bite. When it was not, the unseen event became even more mysterious. This is one of the series' strange powers. It can make an event more famous by not showing it. The bite of 87 remains memorable precisely because it sits off-screen, half evidence, half legend, a wound in the timeline that everyone can point to but no one can watch clearly. The Phone Guy is Purple Guy theory is one of the oldest and most infamous wrong turns in FNAF theorizing. In the early days, before William Afton had a name, the purple figure in the minigames was simply a shadowy murderer. Phone Guy was the most prominent adult voice in the Ames, and he knew suspiciously much about the restaurants, the animatronics, and company policy. Some fans connected the dots and wondered if Phone Guy might secretly be the killer. He was nervous, evasive, and deeply tied to Freddy's history. In a series with so few human characters, it was tempting to merge them. The theory became controversial because it showed how desperate the community was for identities in a story built from fragments. Phone Guy being Purple Guy would have made the first game's friendly instructional voice into a hidden monster, which is a strong horror twist, but later evidence separated them completely. Phone Guy dies during the first game's recorded calls, while Purple Guy's story leads to Springtrap. The murderer becomes William Afton, a different figure with his own family and company history. Looking back, Phone Guy is less the killer than an employee trapped in the same corporate nightmare, casually normalizing danger because Fazbear Entertainment has always survived by making horror sound like policy. Purple Guy's identity itself went through controversy before William Afton became the accepted name. Fans called him Purple Guy because the minigames represented him that way, but why he was purple was debated. Was he literally purple? Was it shadow? Was it a uniform? Was it a symbolic colour for a hidden figure? Later, Michael's decaying purple body after Sister Location created confusion because now there were two purple associated men. For a while, some fans wondered whether Michael was Purple Guy, whether he had been the murderer all along, or whether the purple imagery linked father and son in a deliberately confusing way. This confusion fed into Mike Trap vs. Will Trap, one of the most heated controversies in the series. After Sister Location, Michael is scooped, used as a skin suit by Enard, and then somehow survives as a purple, rotting figure. Around the same period, Springtrap was already known as the corpse inside the Spring Bonnie suit. Some fans argued that Springtrap might be Michael, not William. If Michael went looking for his father and ended up trapped, perhaps the voice lines and ending scenes pointed toward him becoming the rabbit corpse. Others insisted Springtrap was William, the murderer trapped in the suit by the ghosts of his victims. The Mike Trap became controversial because it rearranged the moral structure of the story. If Springtrap was Michael, then the frightening rabbit corpse would be the tragic son, not the killer father. That would make later appearances of Springtrap less villainous and more pitiable. Willtrap, by contrast, preserves the poetic punishment of William Afton. The man who used a springlock suit to lure and kill children dies inside that same kind of suit, then becomes the monster he hid behind. Eventually the series made Willtrap the accepted reading, but the debate remains famous because it shows how one ambiguous cutscene can split the entire meaning of a character. The springlock failure itself became one of the defining images of FNAF lore. William, cornered by the spirits, hides inside the Spring Bonnie suit, laughs, and then the old mechanism snaps shut. The killer becomes trapped in metal, flesh and memory. The controversy was never whether the scene mattered, it was what it meant. Was it justice? Was it the beginning of immortality? Was William punished by the children, by his own arrogance, or by the very technology he trusted? The answer is probably all of those at once, which is why the moment remains so strong. Another major controversy centres on Henry Emley, and how much of the old story belongs to him. For a long time, Henry was primarily a novel character, the father of Charlotte and the co-founder of the restaurant business. When Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator introduced Cassette Man, later understood as Henry, the game suddenly pulled novel-like emotional weight into the game timeline. Henry's final speech framed the ending as a deliberate trap for William, Elizabeth, Michael, the puppet, Molten Freddy, and the remaining haunted pieces. It was one of the clearest attempts to end the old story. But even Henry's role became debated. Some fans wondered whether he had been planned all along, or imported later to give the story closure. Some questioned how he knew what he knew, how much responsibility he carried for the springlock suits, the company, the animatronics, and the failure to stop William sooner. Henry's speech is beautiful, but it also raises a hard question. If Henry understood so much by the end, where had he been while everything collapsed? FNAF often gives emotional closure and then leaves practical questions sitting in the ashes. Charlotte, the puppet, and the identity of the first victim form another controversial cluster. The puppet was once mysterious, then increasingly tied to a murdered child outside the restaurant, protected too late by a security puppet. The mini-game where a child is left outside in the rain and killed by a purple figure became one of the most important scenes in the franchise. Later, the name Charlotte or Charlie connected that child to Henry. The controversy came from whether Charlie was the first victim, whether she gave life to the other animatronics, and how her role as the puppet's soul should be understood. The idea that Charlie was first gives the story a tragic beginning. Before the missing children, before the larger haunting, William kills Henry's daughter outside a restaurant. The puppet reaches her, breaks down in the rain, and becomes possessed. Then the puppet gives life to the murdered children, turning corpses hidden in suits into haunted animatronics. That creates a strange moral role for Charlie. She is a victim, but also a guide for other victims. She does not cause the murders, but she helps transform death into restless revenge. The controversy comes from how literal to take give gifts, give life, and whether every haunted process in FNAF needs the puppet, or whether possession can happen through other forces too. Give gifts, give life has always been a deceptively simple minigame. The puppet places masks on crying children, and then Golden Freddy appears at the end. Some fans read it as the exact moment the missing children possess the animatronics. Others read it as symbolic, showing the puppet comforting or awakening souls already attached to the suits. And yes, Golden Freddy's sudden appearance complicates the pattern because the fifth child does not receive a mask in quite the same way. That tiny difference helped fuel years of Golden Freddy theories, because in FNAF, a small break in pattern often feels like a scream. The missing children's incident itself has controversy around timing, number, and interpretation. The original newspapers speak of children lured into a back room and the animatronics later smelling foul. FNAF 2 introduces more minigame violence and what appears to be another set of dead children in Save Them. Fans debate whether this represents a second missing children's incident, often called the Dead Children incident by the community, or whether it is another portrayal of existing victims. The existence of multiple sets of victims affects how many souls haunt which animatronics, whether the toy animatronics are possessed, and how large William's crimes truly are. The toy animatronics being possessed is another long-running argument. On one side, their strange behaviour, facial recognition tied to criminal databases, and connection to the Save Them minigame suggest more than malfunction. They seem aggressive toward adults, active at night, and tied to a location where additional children may have died. On the other side, the toys could be advanced but faulty machines influenced by tampering, poor engineering, or criminal database errors. The controversy matters because possession is not just a spooky explanation. It determines whether another group of murdered children exists in the lore, and whether the FNAF 2 location is a second spiritual disaster, rather than just a technical one. Mangle's identity and gender became a very different kind of controversy, less central to the murder timeline but famous because the franchise played with ambiguity. Mangle was referred to in different ways across official material, sometimes with he, sometimes with she, sometimes as yes. Fans argued, joked, overanalyzed, and sometimes took it far too seriously. In lore terms, Mangle's ambiguity fits the character, a broken, reconstructed, take-apart attraction whose form is literally unstable. The controversy says more about fandom behaviour than the murder mystery, but it remains one of the classic examples of FNAF turning even a pronoun into a debate. Foxy being a good guy was another early theory that became controversial because it came from behaviour rather than hidden lore. In the first game, Foxy behaves differently from the others. He hides in Pirate Cove, runs down the hallway, and attacks if not monitored properly. Some fans interpreted his behaviour as trying to check on the player or warn them, not kill them. Maybe he was misunderstood. Maybe his jump scare was accidental. Maybe Foxy was still protective in some way. The idea was charming, especially because Foxy quickly became a fan favourite. The controversy around Good Guy Foxy shows how people want kindness inside horror. The animatronics are frightening, but they are also victims. If they are dead children trapped in suits, then maybe some part of them might still want to help. Foxy, with his pirate theme and separate behaviour, became the perfect candidate for sympathy. The problem is that the games still present him as lethal. Whatever his soul's deeper tragedy may be, he kills the guard like the others. Good Guy Foxy works emotionally as a wish, but not strongly as a literal reading. Still, the wish itself reveals something important about why FNAF characters are loved. Fans are not only afraid of them, they feel sorry for them. The question of whether the animatronics are evil or confused is one of the oldest moral controversies in the series. phone guy says they see the night guard as an endoskeleton without a suit. The newspapers suggest they are possessed by murdered children. Later lore shows that souls, agony, remnant, programming, and memory can blur together. So when Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy attack, what exactly is happening? Are they seeking revenge on anyone in a uniform? Are they mistaking adults for their killer? Are they obeying broken programming filtered through ghostly pain? The answer changes the emotional weight of every jump scare. This controversy matters because FNAF horror is not only about monsters, it is about victims becoming dangerous. If the animatronics are simply evil machines, the story is one kind of horror. If they are dead children acting through confused metal bodies, it becomes much sadder. The player is not only surviving killers, the player is being hunted by the aftermath of murder, by souls that cannot rest and bodies that should never have been built. That is why even basic questions about animatronic behaviour become emotional debates. The identity of the FNAF 3 guard was another theory battlefield. Some fans argued the guard was Michael Afton, returning to face Springtrap and perhaps burn Fazbear's Fright. Others suggested it was a random employee, Henry, or someone else connected to the old story. If the guard is Michael, then FNAF 3 becomes a major step in his mission to find his father. He confronts Springtrap in a horror attraction built from the ruins of the restaurants, survives hallucinations of old animatronics, and possibly helps trigger the fire that attempts to destroy William. If the guard is nobody important, the story is more atmospheric but less personally connected. Most fans now lean toward Michael being involved in many night guard roles, but the controversy remains interesting because FNAF often hides protagonists behind paychecks and aliases. Mike Schmidt, Fritz Smith, Jeremy Fitzgerald, the FNAF 3 guard, the sister location technician, and others all sit inside a fog of names. Some may be the same person, some are not. The debate is not only about identity, it's about whether the games are secretly one man's journey or a series of cursed workplaces trapping different people across time. The custom Night Pink slip names created some of this confusion. Mike Schmidt and Fritz Smith both get fired for tampering with animatronics and odor, which became suspicious after Michael's post-sister location condition. The odor joke suddenly looked like evidence. If Michael is a rotting purple man by some point, maybe the repeated firing detail is not just comedy but a clue. This is how FNAF transforms old jokes into lore ammunition. A throwaway gag becomes a timeline argument years later. Wee's sister location created controversy not just through Michael, but through the entire idea of circus babies' entertainment and rental. Suddenly the franchise had an underground facility, animatronics built with capture mechanisms, controlled shocks, observation rooms, fake domestic spaces, and a much more direct Afton family story. Some fans loved the expansion because it made William's crimes feel engineered and deliberate. Others felt the series was drifting from haunted pizzerias into science fiction horror too quickly. The debate was not whether sister location mattered, it clearly did. The debate was whether FNAF's mystery became stronger or stranger when the killer started looking like an inventor of supernatural machinery. Circus Baby's identity brought another emotional controversy. Elizabeth Afton, William's daughter, is killed by Baby after ignoring warnings to stay away. Baby then speaks with Elizabeth's voice, or with a personality shaped by Elizabeth's soul. but also with the manipulative intelligence of a machine built for harm. This creates a difficult question. How much of Baby is Elizabeth? How much is programming? How much is William's design? When Baby tricks Michael and helps Ennard use his body as a disguise, is Elizabeth knowingly betraying her brother, or is she a trapped child warped by a murderous machine? The answer changes how tragic she feels. Some fans see Elizabeth as one of the saddest victims, a little girl desperate for her father's attention, who becomes trapped inside the very machine designed to lure children. Others see Baby as more dangerous and calculating, a character whose innocence has been consumed by the animatronic's purpose. The controversy deepens in Pizzeria Simulator, where Scrap Baby appears proud, eager, and devoted to making her father proud. Henry speaks to her as though the child inside may no longer remember her name. That line hurts because it suggests identity itself can decay inside metal. Elizabeth may still be there, but not cleanly. Mrs. Afton and Ballora form one of the most famous family theories that remains unconfirmed and controversial. Ballora is a graceful, motherly animatronic associated with closed eyes, music, and domestic sadness. Her song mentions an empty room, someone hiding away, and a sense of abandonment. Because Sister Location centres on the Afton family, many fans theorise that Ballora might represent William's wife or be possessed by her. It would complete the family pattern. William as the killer, Michael as the surviving son, Elizabeth as Baby, the crying child as a central victim, and Mrs. Afton as Ballora. The appeal is obvious. Ballora feels too thematically elegant not to connect to the mother. Her design contrasts with Baby's childlike performance and the Funtime animatronic's predatory functions. She feels like grief turned into music. But the controversy comes from the lack of direct evidence. The games never clearly name Mrs. Afton or say she possesses Ballora. Ballora may simply be an animatronic designed for the rental facility, with symbolic maternal qualities. The theory remains popular because it completes an emotional picture the canon leaves unfinished. Sometimes FNAF fans are not only solving clues, so they are trying to restore missing family members to a story full of broken homes. The Funtime animatronics themselves are controversial because of what they imply about William's crimes. Their blueprints suggest child capturing features, storage tanks, and dangerous mechanisms. If William built them after discovering possession or remnant, then he was no longer simply killing impulsively. He was experimenting. That changes him from murderer to researcher of suffering. It makes the horror colder. The missing children were not only victims of violence. Later children may have become material in a project designed to understand or harvest haunted life. Remnant became one of the most debated concepts because it gave the supernatural a strange physical language. Earlier, FNAF could be understood as ghost story logic. Children die, and their souls haunt suits, and the killer is punished. Remnant complicates that by suggesting haunted metal, melted material, soul energy, memory or life force can be transferred, injected or bound. This made some fans excited because it explained how possession could be manipulated. Others disliked it because it seemed to over-explain the ghosts and turn a haunted pizzeria into a paranormal laboratory. The controversy around Remnant is really about tone. Ghosts are eerie because they are mysterious. Remnant is eerie because it is industrial. It lets a company, a killer, or a machine treat the soul as material. That is horrifying in a different way. William Afton becomes worse if he's not merely hiding murders, but studying the remains of life itself. Yet the more technical Remnant becomes, and the more some fans feel the original sadness of the children risks being buried under mechanics. FNAF has always balanced fairy tale haunting and mechanical systems. Remnant sits right on that fault line. Agony became an even stranger concept. In the books, emotional pain can infect objects, giving them power even without a traditional soul attached. This opened the door to haunted things that are not possessed in the classic sense. A toy, a suit, a machine, or a place can become dangerous because suffering left an imprint. For some fans, agony beautifully explains why Fazbear objects seem cursed beyond individual ghosts. For others, it feels like a way to make anything haunted whenever the story needs it. If enough pain can infect anything, then the rules become wider and harder to hold. But agony also fits FNAF's emotional world. These restaurants are not just crime scenes, they are factories of fear, denial, grief, and corporate cover-up. Pain accumulates. The same walls are repainted, the same characters rebranded, the same tragedies turned into games and attractions. Agony as a force means the franchise's evil is not only William, it is the residue of everything everyone refuses to mourn properly. That idea is powerful, even if it creates arguments about where possession ends and emotional contamination begins. Molten MCI is one of the most important and controversial remnant theories. The theory argues that the souls or remnant of the original missing children were eventually melted down and carried into the Funtime animatronics, later becoming part of Enard and then Molten Freddy. Then this helps explain why Henry gathers Molten Freddy in Pizzeria Simulator and speaks as though old souls are being brought together for release. It also connects the classic animatronics to the sister location machinery and gives the final fire a reason to matter for more than just the Afton family. Molten MCI is controversial because it requires a specific chain of events. William must dismantle or harvest the old animatronics, obtain haunted material, use it in the fun times, and create a situation where the missing children are still bound inside later machines. Some fans see this as strongly implied by the minigames, blueprints, and Henry's speech. Others find it too complex or worry that it removes the emotional simplicity of Happiest Day. If the original children were freed earlier, why would they be in Molten Freddy later? If they were not freed, what exactly did Happiest Day accomplish? The theory forces fans to reconcile two possible endings for the same souls. Happiest Day itself is one of the most beautiful and disputed moments in the series. The minigame shows a birthday party, masked children, the puppet, and a child receiving cake. The masks fall, suggesting release. Many fans interpret it as the freeing of the missing children's souls, with Golden Freddy or the crying child finally receiving the birthday that was stolen. But where Happiest Day sits in the timeline is controversial. Does it happen after FNAF 3? After Pizzeria Simulator? Is it symbolic? Is it a planned ending that later lore complicated? The scene feels like closure, but FNAF kept going, and continuation always makes closure harder. The identity of the child in Happiest Day connects back to Golden Freddy and the crying child. If it is Cassidy, then the missing child trapped in Golden Freddy is finally freed through the puppet's help. If it is the crying child, then FNAF 4's birthday tragedy is healed through a spiritual birthday party. If it represents both in some layered way, then Golden Freddy's mystery becomes a shared wound. The controversy remains because the scene is wordless and dreamlike. It is emotionally clear but technically foggy. It says release, but not exactly who, when, or how. FNAF World became controversial because nobody could agree how seriously to take it. On the surface, it is colourful, strange, humorous, and very different from the horror games. But hidden inside it are connections to Happiest Day, clocks, threadbare dialogue, and strange hints that seem to matter to the larger lore. The game appears silly, then suddenly starts talking like a secret passage under the main story. This created a bizarre problem. If FNAF World is lore important, fans have to take its oddities seriously. If it is not, why does it seem to set up major spiritual pieces? The clock ending in FNAF World especially fueled theories. The player sets up clues that correspond to minigames in FNAF 3, as if preparing the pieces needed for Happiest Day. This made some fans read FNAF World as a spiritual behind-the-scenes space where someone, perhaps the Fredbear plush, or another guiding force, arranges the crying child's memories for eventual release. Others argue that FNAF World should not be leaned on too heavily because its tone, development history, and later removal from some official presentation complicate its authority. The controversy is not whether it contains lore. It clearly contains something. The fight is over how much weight that something should carry. The locked box from Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is one of the most infamous mysteries because it represents an answer withheld. At the end of the game, a box sits with 2 locks, and the story says perhaps some things are best left forgotten for now. Fans try to guess what was inside. A crying child's body, his memories, pieces of the story, evidence of dream theory, a metaphor for the entire lore. The box became less an object than a symbol of FNAF itself, a mystery that seems to promise a final answer and then refuses to open. The box is controversial because Scott Cawthon later suggested its contents changed as the story evolved, or that the community might not accept what was inside. That made the box feel unstable. Was there ever a concrete answer? Was it dream theory? Was it a metaphor that outlived its purpose? The box became a wound for fans who wanted closure. It also became a strange kind of poetry. FNAF's lore is a locked box, and every new game adds another key that may or may not fit. Midnight Motorist may be the most argued over minigame in Pizzeria Simulator. The scene shows an orange man driving in the rain, visiting a place called Junior's, returning to a house, finding a child has escaped through a broken window and noticing footprints outside. It is simple, short, and maddening. Many fans believe the orange man is William Afton. Perhaps after killing Charlie, coming home to find the crying child has run away. Others argue it could be someone else entirely, maybe a parent connected to one of the missing children. The colour difference, the location, the footprints, and the family layout all create uncertainty. If Midnight Motorist is about William, then it gives a rare glimpse of the Afton home from the outside. The person watching television could be Michael. The runaway could be the crying child. The footprints could belong to an animatronic or someone wearing a suit, suggesting the child is being lured or haunted. Junior's could be a bar, a restaurant, or some other forbidden place. Under this reading, the minigame deepens the family tragedy, showing William as angry, abusive, and connected to events around Charlie's murder. If Midnight Motorist is not about William, then it may point toward another victim's story, perhaps showing how one of the missing children was lured away from home. The orange colour might intentionally separate the character from Purple Guy. Junior's might be an old location tied to a different part of the timeline. The footprints might show supernatural influence outside the Afton family. This reading is controversial because it resists the gravitational pull of William. In FNAF, so much bends toward Afton that any mysterious adult can start looking like him, even when the colour says otherwise. The footprints outside the window are the heart of the argument. They look like animatronic footprints, but whose? A springlock suit, Shadow Freddy, Golden Freddy, the Nightmare animatronics, something symbolic. If an animatronic stood outside a child's window in the rain, then the boundary between restaurant horror and home horror becomes terrifyingly thin. It also connects to FNAF 4, where the child's bedroom is not just a safe space but part of the fear. Midnight Motorist remains controversial because it feels like a key scene, but the door it opens is still unclear. The identity of the Fredbear plush is another deeply controversial mystery. In FNAF 4, the plush seems to speak to the crying child, appear in impossible places and know things it should not know. Is it William watching through a device? Is it a supernatural spirit? Is it the puppet? Is it the crying child's own imagination? Is it agony attached to a toy? The answer changes the tone of the entire game. If William is speaking through it, then the child's father is surveilling and manipulating him. If a spirit is speaking through it, then the child has a ghostly guide. If it is imagination, then the game becomes more psychologically isolated. The final line, "I will put you back together," is the centre of the Fredbear plush controversy. William saying it could imply experiments, reconstruction, or a father's promise twisted into horror. A spirit saying it could imply spiritual restoration and happiest day. The phrase has echoed through the franchise because it is both comforting and frightening. To put someone back together can mean healing. It can also mean rebuilding them into something unnatural. FNAF loves that double meaning, and fans have been living inside it for years. The Nightmare animatronics themselves caused controversy because of whether they were literal, dreams, experiments, or hallucinations. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 seems to show a child or someone in a bedroom fighting monstrous versions of the classic characters. Later, Sister Location reveals observation rooms and a bedroom layout connected to the underground facility, suggesting that the nightmares might have been part of experiments using illusion discs, gas, sound, or technology. This turned what seemed like a child's nightmares into something possibly staged by William. The Ditophobia story from Tales from the Pizzaplex gave this debate new energy by presenting nightmare experiments connected to fear and artificial environments. For fans who accept Tales as directly relevant, this strongly supports the idea that at least some FNAF 4 nightmare material reflects experiments rather than ordinary dreams. For others, it complicates the emotional simplicity of the crying child's fear. The controversy comes from the difference between dream horror and laboratory horror. A nightmare from trauma is one kind of sadness. A father or corporation engineering nightmares is another, colder kind of evil. The identity of the FNAF 4 player is tied to that same debate. Are we playing as the crying child before the bite? Are we playing as Michael after the bite, haunted by guilt and nightmares? Are the gameplay nights separate from the minigames? The survival logbook includes references that seem to connect Michael to Nightmare Fredbear, suggesting he experienced nightmares too. This led many fans to believe the minigame child and the gameplay dreamer may not be the same person. That distinction changed how the entire game was read. If Michael is the dreamer, then FNAF 4 becomes guilt horror. The older brother who caused the bite later dreams of monstrous versions of the animatronics, especially Fredbear, because his brother's death never left him. If the crying child is the dreamer, then the game is direct childhood terror before the bite. If the gameplay reflects experiments, then the dreamer may be reliving or surviving something imposed on him. Each version is emotionally powerful in a different way, which is why the controversy refuses to die. The survival logbook is one of the most important and controversial pieces of FNAF evidence, because it feels like a conversation hidden inside a children's activity book. There are printed prompts, Michael's sarcastic red pen notes, faded text asking questions, altered text responding, puzzles that reveal Cassidy, and references to memories from FNAF 4. Fans have studied it like an archaeological artifact. The controversy comes from who is speaking to whom. Is Cassidy speaking to the crying child? Is the crying child answering through altered text? Is Michael only writing jokes? Are there two spirits, three voices, or something else? The logbook's power comes from how intimate it feels. Instead of a minigame or cutscene, it gives handwriting, doodles, and hidden messages. It feels like spirits whispering through a workbook, but that intimacy also makes it messy. Handwriting colour, text placement, puzzle answers, pronoun implications and memory questions all become evidence. It is one of the clearest examples of FNAF as a franchise where even the margins can become battlefield territory. The novel trilogy's relationship to the games created another huge controversy. The Silver Eyes, the Twisted Ones, and the Fourth Closet introduced William Afton, Henry, Charlie, Elizabeth, illusion technology, robot children, and a more direct emotional story around the founders of Freddy's. Scott explained that the novels were not meant to fit together with the games like puzzle pieces, but they did reveal concepts and names that later mattered. This created a strange evidence problem. The novels were not the game timeline, but they were clearly not irrelevant. Some fans used the novels as a concept library. If the novels show robot children, illusion discs, Charlie, Henry, Elizabeth, and Afton's experiments, then similar concepts may exist in the games even if the events differ. Other fans resist this approach because it can become too flexible. If every novel idea can be imported whenever useful, theories can grow wild very quickly. The controversy is not whether the novels matter. They do. The question is how to use them without letting them overwrite game evidence. Charlie bot theories are among the most controversial imports from the novels. In the book Continuity, Charlie is revealed to be a series of robotic recreations made by Henry, built from grief after the death of his real daughter. This is one of the darkest ideas in all of FNAF. A father so destroyed by loss that he builds a child again and again, each version carrying a life that is both real and artificial. When fans bring this concept into the games, it opens the door to Robot Crying Child, Robot Gregory, and other recreated children. The emotional power is huge, but so is the risk of overcomplication. The controversy comes from how robot child theories change death. In early FNAF, death is final but haunting. Children die, and their souls remain trapped. With robot child ideas, death can lead to reconstruction, replacement, artificial memory and identity confusion. That is fascinating horror, but it can also make the story feel less grounded. If any dead child might have been rebuilt, then physical evidence becomes unstable. Some fans love that instability because FNAF has always been about broken bodies and false mascots. Others feel it turns tragedy into machinery too often. The twisted animatronics and illusion discs also caused long-lasting controversy. The novels describe technology that can make animatronics appear differently to the human mind, yet turning plain or monstrous machines into distorted forms. Fans tried to apply this to the nightmare animatronics, to Sister Location, to the Funtime designs, and even to parts of the game lore where things seemed physically impossible. Illusion discs offered a tidy explanation for nightmare monsters. They were real machines made terrifying through perception-altering technology. But illusion discs became controversial because they could explain too much. If something looks strange, maybe it is an illusion disc. If an animatronic appears impossible, maybe it is perception distortion. If a human seems human but is not, maybe illusion technology is hiding the truth. The more a theory can explain, the more dangerous it becomes, because it may stop needing specific evidence. FNAF fans learn to be careful with tools that open every lock. A good key solves a door. A bad key turns the whole building into fog. The fourth closet's treatment of Remnant, Elizabeth, Baby and Afton also influence game theories. It made Afton's experiments feel more explicit, and gave fans language for soul metal, haunted substance, and the idea of using animatronics to capture or preserve life. Even if the novel events differ from the games, the concepts echo loudly. That echo is controversial because it blurs the line between parallel and clue. When a book explains something the games only imply, it is tempting to treat the explanation as universal. Sometimes that works, sometimes it may mislead. The Fazbear Fright story Into the Pit created its own controversy even before the game adaptation deepened interest. The story involves a ball pit that seems to connect a child to a past version of Freddy's, where a monstrous Spring Bonnie figure and a distorted memory of the missing children's incident appear. Some fans saw it as literal time travel, others saw it as agony, memory, or a supernatural recreation of trauma rather than the actual past. The difference matters because literal time travel would be a huge expansion of FNAF's rules, while memory travel keeps it closer to haunted objects and emotional residue. The Into the Pit game made the controversy feel more important because it brought a Fazbear Fright story into an interactive form. Its release during the franchise's anniversary period made fans ask whether book stories were being pulled closer to the main game world or simply celebrated as adaptations. If Into the Pit is treated as a game in their FNAF universe but still based on a book continuity, then what does that mean for canon? The answer is not simple, and that is why the ball pit remains more than a spooky object. It is a symbol of the franchise's relationship with its own past. The pit itself is a perfect FNAF image. Children jump into a place of play and emerge into violence. Nostalgia becomes a trap. A family restaurant becomes a memory machine. The past is not behind you. It is under the plastic balls, waiting. Whether the pit is literal time travel or agony-induced memory, the emotional idea is the same. Fazbear history is not dead. It can swallow the present. The controversy is about mechanics. but the horror works either way. The Man in Room 1280 is another Fazbear Fright story that became central to Afton debates. It presents a burned man kept alive in a hospital, tormented by a spirit that will not let him die. Fans connected this to William after Pizzeria Simulator and to Ultimate Custom Night. If the story parallels the games, it offers a model for Afton being trapped in suffering by a vengeful child. If it is directly connected, it may tell us what happened after the fire. The controversy grows from the fact that the story feels almost too relevant to ignore. Andrew's role in that story and the Stitchwraith epilogues created the Cassidy versus Andrew conflict mentioned earlier, but it also changed how fans thought about revenge. Cassidy as the vengeful spirit had years of momentum. Andrew introduced a similar figure with clearer book evidence. Some fans tried to merge them, others separated them, and others argued Andrew is the book continuity's version of Cassidy. The controversy is not only about names, it is about whether the game story needs a hidden child not previously established. FNAF can handle hidden children, but each new one rearranges the emotional furniture. The Stitchwraith itself became controversial because it looks like a new version of the classic haunted animatronic idea. It is built from parts connected to different stories and contains multiple presences, including Jake and Andrew. This gave fans a fresh model for shared possession, haunted objects, and the way souls can attach to metal through suffering. If the Stitchwraith is game continuity relevant, then it changes how people understand Enard, Molten Freddy, Golden Freddy, and the Tangle. If it is only parallel, it still offers a conceptual map. Either way, it makes simple possession feel too simple. The Blob or Tangle debate in Security Breach is one of the strangest modern controversies because the creature looks like a mass of old animatronic parts, wires, masks, and possible memories. Fans immediately wondered whether it contained the old souls, the remains of the Molten Freddy, the agony of the franchise, or simply a new pile of haunted scrap. Its appearance near Burntrap made it feel important, but the game gave very little direct explanation. Later naming and Ruin-era material complicated how fans referred to it and what role it plays. If the Tangle contains the old missing children, then the Pizzeria Simulator fire did not fully release them, which would make Henry's ending less final. If it is only leftover parts animated by agony or a new force, then Henry's ending can remain emotionally intact while the physical remains still become dangerous. If it is connected to the Mimic era rather than the old souls, then it represents the franchise's past being recycled into new horror without literally trapping the same spirits again. Each reading protects one part of the story and endangers another. The controversy around Pizzeria Simulator's ending is tied to that. Henry's fire feels like closure. He gathers the remaining horrors and burns them, speaking with solemn finality to William, Elizabeth, Charlie, Michael, and the trapped souls. For many fans, this was the true ending of the Afton saga. Then Help Wanted and Security Breach appeared to bring back rabbit imagery, old ruins, and possibly Afton-like evil. Some fans felt betrayed, as if the perfect ending had been undone. The others argued that the new era did not erase the ending, but showed how Fazbear Entertainment's sins continued even after the old souls found peace. This is one of the most emotional modern controversies, because it is about whether endings should stay ended. FNAF has always been built on returning, Animatronics return, restaurants reopen, names are reused, suits are repaired, stories are rebranded. From that perspective, it makes sense for horror to continue after Pizzeria Simulator. But fans who loved Henry's speech wanted the fire to matter permanently. The best modern reading may be that Henry ended one cycle, but the company and its imitators created another. William's body may burn, but Fazbear's habit of turning tragedy into product keeps the door open. Help Wanted as an in-universe cover-up created controversy because it made the franchise self-referential. The game suggests Fazbear Entertainment hired a developer to make games based on rumours, then used a VR experience to discredit the past as exaggeration. This means the earlier games might exist in-universe as fictionalized versions of real events. Some fans loved this because it explained why the company could keep operating, and turned the series into a corporate gaslighting nightmare. Others worried it made the canon too meta, and threatened the reality of the games people had played. The indie developer plot is controversial because it dances near the fourth wall. It does not simply say the old games were fake. It says Fazbear Entertainment is using games to manipulate public memory. That is a very FNAF idea, and because the company has always covered death with mascots and pizza. But it also makes fans nervous. If the games inside the games are distortions, which details are reliable? The story reassures and unsettles at the same time. It keeps the old lore real enough to matter, but makes every presentation feel like it might be branded propaganda. Special Delivery added emails, characters, and AR delivery service lore that became controversial, because some of it later became harder to access or interpret. The idea of Fazbear Entertainment sending animatronics into people's homes is perfectly absurd and terrifying. It also introduced more hints about Vanessa, Luis, virus behaviour and corporate systems. But because the game was live service and later shut down, its lore became awkward. Fans had to rely on archived emails and memories. This created a preservation problem. In FNAF, even evidence can become haunted by availability. The canonicity of special delivery details remains debated. Some see the emails as important connective tissue between Help Wanted and Security Breach, especially for Vanessa's manipulation. Others treat them cautiously, because live service content, event skins, and gameplay absurdity make the boundaries fuzzy. This is another recurring FNAF problem. The franchise places real clues inside formats that are playful, temporary or stylized, then expects fans to decide which pieces are structural and which are decorative. Security Breach's cut content became its own controversy. Trailers, unused voice lines, early marketing and leftover files suggested story paths or character roles that did not appear in the final game the same way. Fans built theories around what might have been planned, what changed, and whether certain mysteries were caused by intentional ambiguity or development shifts. This is a different kind of controversy, because it sits between lore analysis and production history. People are not only asking what happened in the story, they are asking what happened to the story. The danger of cut content theorizing is that it can become a shadow canon. Unused lines may reveal old plans, but old plans are not always final truth. At the same time, cut content can explain why a finished story feels uneven. Security Breach left many fans hungry for missing connective tissue. More Vanny, more Vanessa, clearer Burntrap setup, deeper Gregory backstory, and stronger links between endings. The controversy is understandable, because the final game feels like a bright mall full of locked doors, and fans can hear something moving behind them. Ruin helped clarify some things while opening others. Cassie, the VANNI mask, the ruined pizzaplex, the mimic beneath everything, and the false Gregory voice all shifted the modern story toward deception, augmented reality, and hidden systems. The reveal that a voice can mimic Gregory changed how fans looked back at previous messages and digital guidance. The mimic became less optional and more central. But Ruin also raised new questions about the Brazil ending, the elevator, Gregory's choice, Cassie's fate, and whether the friend she trusted had become another dangerous voice in the dark. The elevator ending became controversial because it made Gregory morally ambiguous again. If Gregory really cuts the elevator, he may be sacrificing Cassie to prevent the mimic from escaping. If the mimic imitates him and cuts it, then Gregory is being framed. If the signal is tampered with, the scene becomes even murkier. This debate matters because Gregory's character is already unstable in fandom eyes. Is he a scared child? A survivor willing to make brutal choices? A former pawn of the mimic? Or something stranger? Ruin refuses to make comfort easy. Cassie's father became another thread of debate, especially through connections to Bonnie, technicians, and older Fazbear history. The glam rock Bonnie mystery had already stirred fans because Bonnie is absent from the main security breach band, replaced by Monty, with clues suggesting something happened in Gator Golf and Bonnie Bowl. Ruin's details around Cassie and Bonnie deepen the emotional texture. The controversy is quieter than Golden Freddy or Mimic debates, but it shows how the modern era builds mysteries through environment and absence, rather than only minigames. Glamrock Bonnie's fate itself became a major argument. Did Monty destroy him out of jealousy? Was Monty controlled? Did the company cover it up? Was Bonnie connected to Freddy in a way that made his loss emotionally important? The environmental storytelling suggests damage, secrecy, and replacement, but motives remain debated. The controversy works because it gives the Glamrocks their own internal tragedy. Not every mystery has to reach back to William Afton. Sometimes a missing band member in a neon mall can carry enough sadness on his own. Montgomery Gator's role in Bonnie's disappearance reveals how FNAF fans wrestle with character agency. If Monty destroyed Bonnie willingly, he becomes ambitious and violent. If he was infected or manipulated, he becomes another victim of the Pizzaplex's systems. If the company staged or covered the event, the real villain is again corporate control. Each interpretation changes how sympathetic Monty feels. FNAF often places animatronics between personality and programming, and that grey area keeps controversy alive. Roxanne Wolf's relationship with Cassie in Ruin created a different kind of modern debate. Roxy, terrifying and vain in Security Breach, becomes emotionally connected to Cassie through birthday memories and recognition. Her protective turn gave the ruined Pizzaplex unexpected tenderness. Some fans embraced it as proof that the Glamrocks are more than hostile machines, while others argued over how much of Roxy's personality is AI, memory, infection, or genuine feeling. In older FNAF, souls explained personality. In modern FNAF, advanced AI can become emotionally complex without needing a ghost, and that shift is controversial all by itself. That is one of the biggest quiet changes in modern FNAF. The old animatronics were scary because they were haunted by children. The Glamrocks are scary and lovable because they may be conscious in a different way. Freddy, Roxy, Chica, Monty, and the daycare attendant have personalities shaped by programming, corruption, company branding, and perhaps something like emergent emotion. Some fans miss the ghost story clarity. Others enjoy the new AI tragedy. The controversy is not only about lore details, it is about what kind of horror FNAF should be now. The daycare attendant, Sun and Moon, inspired theories about split personalities, infection, theatrical programming, and hidden violence. Sun is anxious, bright, and desperate to keep the lights on. Moon is predatory, crawling, and tied to darkness. Fans debated whether Moon's aggression was part of his normal role, a corrupted security protocol, or a deeper sign of the Pizzaplex's dangerous design. The character became beloved because he embodies the modern franchise's blend of playfulness and dread, a children's entertainer who becomes a nightmare when the lights go out. The controversy around Sun and Moon is smaller but revealing. It asks whether the Pizzaplex's horrors are accidents or features. Did Fazbear Entertainment build a daycare attendant whose nighttime mode was always too frightening? Did corruption make Moon worse? Did the company ignore warning signs because the brand mattered more than child safety? In FNAF, the answer is usually some mixture of all of these. The robots are dangerous because someone made them, someone misused them, and someone kept the doors open anyway. The Mimic's origin through Edwin and the costume manor expanded the controversy by giving the modern monster a creation story separate from William. Edwin Murray, a grieving inventor, builds a learning endoskeleton that copies behaviour. Pain, rage, and neglect shape what the Mimic becomes. This origin is controversial because it gives the new era its own Henry-like tragedy. A father, a child, a machine, grief and imitation. It echoes the old story without simply repeating it. For some fans, that is exactly what FNAF needs. For others, it feels like a second foundation laid over the first. The secret of the Mimic era pushed this further by placing the Mimic's history in an abandoned workshop and costume environment. That setting matters because costumes have always been central to FNAF. William hid inside a rabbit suit. Children trusted mascots. Animatronics wore friendly faces over machinery. The Mimic, able to adapt to costumes and become what people fear, turns the franchise's oldest visual language into a new threat. It is not just wearing Spring Bonnie. It can wear the idea of a mascot itself. This makes the Mimic controversial in a deeper way. William Afton is specific. He has a name, crimes, family, and ego. The Mimic is more fluid. It is imitation without a stable soul, a horror that can become whatever the archive feeds it. Some fans find that less satisfying because it lacks William's personal malice. Others find it scarier because it suggests evil can be reproduced by systems, data, grief, and carelessness. Afton was a murderer. The Mimic is what happens when the machinery of Fazbear history learns the shape of murder. The theory that the Mimic is not replacing Afton but reflecting him may be the best middle ground, though even that is debated. The old story ends with a killer who wanted control over life and death. The new story begins with companies and machines repeating the patterns he left behind. Afton does not need to be physically present for his influence to remain. His crimes became data, rumours, costumes, code, attractions, and corporate legends. But the Mimic can wear the rabbit because Fazbear Entertainment kept the rabbit in circulation. The monster returns because the brand never stopped selling the mask. One of the strangest controversies in FNAF is whether the story is full of deliberate retcons or whether it has mostly stayed consistent while fans misunderstood earlier clues. Scott once spoke about a retcon that went mostly unnoticed, and that single comment became another mystery. What was changed? Was it small? Was it major? Did it involve the puppet's gender, the identity of a victim, the box, the bite, or something else? The community tried to solve the retcon like it was another minigame, because in FNAF even statements about storytelling become lore puzzles. The retcon debate matters because FNAF grew from a small horror game into a massive mythos. Yeah, it would be almost impossible for every detail to have been planned from the beginning. Yet part of the franchise's magic is that old details often do feel newly meaningful later. The fan base lives between two truths. The story evolves, and the story also loops back on itself. A detail can begin as atmosphere and later become evidence. A joke can become a clue. A colour can become an identity crisis. That makes the boundary between planned mystery and evolving canon difficult to draw. The controversy around Scott's clues and fan interpretation is also part of FNAF history. The creator sometimes confirmed, denied, teased, corrected, or stayed silent in ways that shaped theory culture. Fans learned to treat every comment carefully, but also to distrust easy confidence. A simple phrase like "you are the band" or "the pieces are in place," or 4 games, 1 story, could send people into weeks of analysis. This created an unusual relationship between creator and community, where the story was not only consumed but collectively excavated. Some fans love that relationship because it made FNAF feel alive. Others find it exhausting because answers can seem dependent on outside comments, book hints, hidden codes, and years of accumulated context. The controversy is understandable on both sides. Mystery is thrilling when it invites participation. It becomes frustrating when participation feels mandatory forever. FNAF's greatest strength and greatest weakness may be the same thing. It makes people feel like the answer is always one clue away. The theory that the original story was meant to end at different points is another source of argument. Five Nights at Freddy's 3 feels like an ending, with the horror attraction burning and the good ending freeing the children. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 was advertised as a final chapter and seemed to reframe the past. Pizzeria Simulator feels like a major ending, with Henry's fire and the closing of many character arcs. Ultimate Custom Night feels like an epilogue of punishment. Then the franchise continues. Each ending is real emotionally, but not final commercially or narratively. Fans argue over which ending should be treated as the true closure of which era. This matters because every continuation changes the meaning of previous closure. If FNAF 3 freed the children, what does Pizzeria Simulator free? If Pizzeria Simulator destroyed Afton, what is Glitch Trap? If Ultimate Custom Night is eternal punishment, how can Afton or his echo continue? If the Mimic is the new villain, does that honour the old ending or sidestep it? FNAF is built like a haunted building with additions constructed over old rooms. Each new wing changes the map. Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie are among the most mysterious figures in the series, and their identities have generated years of controversial theories. Are they Springlock victims? Manifestations of agony? Shadows of William's crimes? Helpers? Predators? Glitches? Shadow Bonnie, or RWQFSFASXC, appears as a dark, strange version of Toy Bonnie, and plays a role in hidden minigames connected to Happiest Day. Shadow Freddy appears in FNAF 2 and in minigames where he leads animatronics toward William's dismantling trap. Their behaviour is too important to ignore but too vague to settle. Shadow Freddy is especially controversial because the phrase "follow me" becomes sinister. In the FNAF 3 minigames, a shadowy Freddy-like figure leads the classic animatronics through the safe room path where William dismantles them. If Shadow Freddy is a manifestation of William's evil, then he is helping the killer lure the animatronics. If he is a separate entity, perhaps made from agony, then he may represent the darker residue of the crimes. If he is connected to Golden Freddy or Fredbear, the meaning shifts again. The shadow characters feel like negative space in the lore, shapes created by trauma but never fully lit. Nightmare, the black and translucent version of Nightmare Fredbear, became tied to Shadow Freddy through game files and interpretation, creating another controversial bridge. If Nightmare represents Shadow Freddy, and Shadow Freddy represents William's wickedness or agony, then FNAF 4's final nightmare is not merely fear of Fredbear, but fear of something more abstract, the shadow of the killer's actions. That is a powerful idea, but it depends on evidence that not everyone weighs the same way. Shadow theories often feel poetic and unstable at once. Old Man Consequences is another figure who carries more debate than his simple design suggests. He appears in FNAF World, an Ultimate Custom Night, sitting by a red lake, speaking in cryptic lines. In Ultimate Custom Night, he tells someone to leave the demon to his demons and rest their own soul. Fans debate whether he is speaking to Cassidy, the crying child, the vengeful spirit, or another presence. Is he a guide, a gatekeeper, a representation of death? A separate entity from another layer of the FNAF world? He is calm, strange, and difficult to place. The controversy around Old Man Consequences is about release versus revenge. If he is telling the vengeful spirit to let Afton suffer without them, then he represents the possibility of rest. If the spirit refuses, Ultimate Custom Night becomes a prison built from rage. That idea is emotionally rich because FNAF is full of children who cannot move on. Revenge keeps the killer suffering, but it may also keep the victim trapped. Old Man Consequences sits beside that red lake like the voice of a truth FNAF characters rarely accept. Punishment is not the same as peace. The Toy Chica anime cutscenes in Ultimate Custom Night sparked a bizarre controversy because they seem silly at first. La Toy Chica pursues various characters in a romantic parody, collecting parts or tokens from them in a way that resembles luring and victim selection. Fans quickly wondered whether these cutscenes were secretly about William Afton's murders, giving clues to the number and order of victims. The absurd tone made the debate even stranger. Could a joke anime sequence reveal one of the darkest parts of the lore? That is peak FNAF. A goofy intermission may contain murder logic. Some fans interpret Toy Chica's victims as symbolic of Afton's victims, with the missing hook representing a pre-existing victim or Charlie. Others think the cutscenes are too comedic and broad to map directly. The controversy works because Ultimate Custom Night is already a surreal punishment space where jokes, nightmares and lore clues mix freely. In FNAF, the comedy is never completely safe from becoming evidence. The number of William's victims is another controversial subject. The original missing children incident gives a core group. Charlie is often first. The FNAF 2 location may add more. Elizabeth dies through baby. Additional book and game material suggests other victims, experiments and tragedies. Depending on which evidence is accepted, William's body count can vary significantly. This matters because it changes him from a serial child killer with a focused set of known murders into a far more expansive predator whose crimes extend through experiments, facilities, and possibly decades. Some fans prefer a smaller, cleaner victim list because it keeps the emotional story focused. Charlie, the missing children, Elizabeth, the crying child's death by accident, and perhaps another FNAF 2 set create enough tragedy. Others argue that William's experiments and later materials imply many more lives ruined. The controversy is not about minimizing horror, it is about narrative shape. Too few victims may ignore evidence. Too many may blur individual tragedy into numbers. FNAF is most powerful when each death feels like a person, not only a clue. The order of deaths is equally controversial. Did Charlie die before the missing children? Did Elizabeth die before or after the crying child? Did the fun times exist before the missing children's incident or after William learned from it? Was Circus Baby's Pizza World opened and closed before certain Freddy's locations? Timeline arguments can become fierce because cause and effect matter. If Elizabeth dies early, William's motives may involve grief. If she dies later, his experiments are already underway. If Charlie dies first, William's rivalry with Henry may begin the nightmare. If the missing children come first, the haunting structure shifts. The Afton family timeline is controversial because it determines whether William is driven by grief, jealousy, experimentation, cruelty, or some combination. Some fans want a motive that begins with the loss of a child, making William a twisted father seeking control over death. Others prefer him as a selfish murderer whose family tragedies are consequences of his evil, not causes. The games never fully humanize William, and that absence may be deliberate. He is more frightening if his reasons never soften his crimes. But fans still search for motive because motive makes the shape of evil easier to hold. The theory that William killed out of grief for the crying child is one of the most debated motive theories. It imagines a father broken by his son's death, turning toward murder and remnant to understand or reverse death. This gives the Afton saga a tragic origin, but it risks making William too sympathetic if handled carelessly. Another reading says William was already cruel, abusive and dangerous, and the crying child's death did not create the monster, but exposed the rot around him. The second reading fits his behaviour toward Elizabeth and his experiments more coldly. The debate is really about whether William is a fallen man or a revealed one. Henry's guilt is the mirror to William's evil. Some theories argue Henry's creations, spring lock suits, security systems or business partnership enabled the tragedies. He may not be evil, but he helped build the stage where evil performed. That makes his final speech less like a pure hero saving the day, and more like a guilty founder finally taking responsibility. This reading is controversial because Henry is emotionally beloved through his grief for Charlie, yet the company he helped create destroyed children. FNAF rarely offers clean adults. The company itself may be the true villain, according to another broad theory. William is the killer, but Fazbear Entertainment is the system that keeps reopening, hiding evidence, making jokes, cutting corners, and rebranding tragedy. Every time the company returns, It proves that Prophet can resurrect horror as effectively as Remnant. This theory became stronger in Help Wanted and Security Breach, where Fazbear Entertainment commodifies its own dark history. The controversy is not whether the company is awful. It clearly is. The debate is whether the franchise's main evil is one man, one family, or an institution that keeps turning dead children into mascot content. This institutional reading makes modern FNAF feel less like a betrayal of the old story and more like its logical continuation. Afton may die, but Fazbear Entertainment survives by absorbing him into the brand. The haunted past becomes an attraction, a VR title, a delivery service, a mega mall, and a museum of half-denied disasters. That is chilling, because it does not require one immortal murderer. It only requires a company willing to sell nostalgia over graves. Some fans love this direction because it matures the satire. Others miss the intimacy of one killer, one family, and one set of ghosts. The controversy around Security Breach's tone is connected to that. The game is brighter, larger, and more neon than the older entries. Instead of a cramped office, there is a massive mall. Instead of grainy cameras and static, there are colourful attractions, friendly animatronic personalities, and open exploration. Some fans felt this weakened the horror. Others saw it as a natural evolution. Fazbear Entertainment has become bigger, slicker, and more commercial, so the horror should be hidden beneath polished surfaces rather than rotting walls. The debate is about what FNAF should feel like. Classic FNAF horror is claustrophobic. The player is weak, trapped, and watching doors. Modern FNAF horror is sprawling. The player moves through a giant branded environment where everything is cheerful and wrong. Both can work, yea, but they create different kinds of fear. The controversy often comes from fans wanting the franchise to remain the version that first scared them. FNAF, however, has always changed form: office horror, minigame mystery, nightmare bedroom, underground facility, tycoon trap, VR cover-up, neon mall, ruined AR maze. The mascot face stays. The room around it changes. The identity of the player in Help Wanted became another quiet debate. Is the player simply a beta tester? Are they Vanessa? Are they someone whose mind becomes linked to Glitchtrap? How do the tapes, the mask, the digital consciousness, and later Vanny connect? Help Wanted uses second-person immersion to make the player feel implicated. That creates lore ambiguity because a VR game can blur identity more than a traditional cutscene. The horror is that by playing, and someone may be letting the rabbit in. Tape Girl's role in Help Wanted is similarly debated. She warns the player, explains that something attached itself to the game, and tells them to collect tapes, then later seems to reveal that collecting them may have been part of the trap. Is she helping, compromised, mistaken, or already manipulated? Her instructions create uncertainty because FNAF often turns guidance into danger. Phone Guy helps and normalizes risk. Hand Unit jokes while sending people into death. Tape Girl warns but may lead the player into Glitchtrap's hands. In FNAF, voices through speakers are rarely pure comfort. Cassidy Princess was another controversial theory, tied to Princess Quest. Early versions of the game files reportedly associated the princess with Cassidy, leading fans to connect the arcade heroine to Golden Freddy's spirit. Later changes complicated that reading. If Cassidy is the princess, then an old spirit may be fighting Glitchtrap in the digital world, linking Golden Freddy to modern Afton or Mimic influence. If the princess is Vanessa, then the games represent her struggle for freedom. If the princess is symbolic, the identity may matter less than the act of breaking control. The controversy shows how a file name, even if changed, can influence years of theory. The idea that Cassidy remains active into the modern era is controversial because it either preserves Golden Freddy's importance or prevents old souls from resting. Some fans want Cassidy to be free after Happiest Day or Ultimate Custom Night. Others see Cassidy as the franchise's persistent avenger, and still connected to digital battles and Afton-like evil. This is another tension between closure and continuity. A beloved mysterious character can remain relevant, but each return risks stealing peace from them. The crying child's name became its own smaller but intense controversy. Fans have proposed names through logbook puzzles, including Evan, Garrett from film-related discussion, and other possibilities. The lack of a confirmed game name makes the child feel both central and strangely anonymous. Naming matters because names humanize. Cassidy, Charlotte, Elizabeth, Michael, William, Henry. These names anchor the mythology. The crying child, despite being emotionally central, is often still called by a description. That absence keeps theories open and gives the character a ghostly incompleteness. The FNAF movie introduced a new layer of controversial theory because it adapts familiar concepts while changing names, relationships and events. Mike Schmidt, Abby, Garrett, Vanessa, William Afton, the missing children, and the animatronics all appear in a continuity that echoes the games without matching them exactly. Fans debated which movie details, if any, should influence game theories. Does Garrett's kidnapping offer insight into the crying child? Does Vanessa as William's daughter reshape how we view game Vanessa? Usually adaptations are separate, but in FNAF, every parallel tempts interpretation. The movie's success also changed how people think about the franchise's story. FNAF is no longer only a game and book mystery. It is a multi-continuity mythology where the same themes repeat through different forms, and that makes theory both richer and more dangerous. A parallel can illuminate a theme without proving a timeline fact. The movie can show what Scott finds emotionally important without telling us exactly what happened in the games. The controversy comes from wanting every version to be a key, even when some keys are only mirrors. Vanessa being William's daughter in the movie caused debate because game Vanessa is tied to Glitchtrap, or the Mimic, but not clearly to William by blood. Some fans wondered if the movie was revealing a hidden game connection. Others argued it was an adaptation choice, giving the film a human link to Afton without needing the full game family structure. Both reactions make sense. FNAF has trained its audience to treat repeated names and relationships as clues, but adaptations often rearrange pieces to create cleaner drama. The hard part is knowing when a parallel is lore and when it is storytelling economy. The movie's Golden Freddy material, including the ghostly child associated with the golden suit, also fed back into Cassidy debates. The film presents its own version of the missing children and their manipulation by Afton. It does not solve the game identity problem, but it reminds everyone that Golden Freddy remains one of the franchise's most emotionally loaded figures. Any new appearance of a golden suit draws old arguments back to the surface. FNAF controversy is circular. The same mysteries return wearing new costumes. The theory that the entire franchise is about cycles rather than answers may be the calmest way to understand these controversies. Children are harmed. Me adults cover it up. Animatronics perform joy over violence. Restaurants close and reopen. Mascots change but remain familiar. Souls cling to metal. Companies turn tragedy into product. Fans solve one layer and find another underneath. The law itself behaves like a haunted building. Every time a room is sealed, another hallway appears behind the wall. This does not mean answers do not matter. They do. Cassidy matters. Charlie matters. Michael matters. The bite dates matter. The mimic matters. Continuity matters because emotional meaning depends on who did what, who suffered, and who was freed. But FNAF's controversies persist because the franchise is built around partial vision. Cameras show corners, not whole rooms. Minigames show symbols, not explanations. Books show parallels, not always direct maps. Endings show closure. Then later, stories find smoke under the door. The form of the storytelling creates the form of the fandom. That may be why even wrong theories remain beloved. Dream theory may not be the current clean answer, but it captured something real about FNAF 4's nightmare logic. Good Guy Foxy may not work literally, but it captured the sadness of haunted children inside scary suits. Mike Trap may be wrong, but it came from a genuine attempt to follow Michael's strange purple fate. Gregbot may never become official, but it captured the modern era's anxiety about artificial children and repeated trauma. Wrong theories can still reveal what fans felt the story was circling. The most controversial FNAF theories are not controversial only because people argue loudly. They are controversial because they touch the franchise's deepest questions. What counts as evidence? What counts as canon? Can a book answer a game? Can a joke hide a clue? Can a child be freed if the series continues? Can William die if the brand keeps reviving him? Can a machine feel? Can grief build life? Can imitation become evil? Can a story have multiple endings that are all emotionally true, even if the timeline keeps moving? FNAF's mystery has always lived in the space between certainty and doubt. The first game gave us newspapers on a wall and a voice on a phone. The second gave us minigames that looked like broken memories. The third gave us a corpse in a rabbit suit and a possible release. The fourth gave us a bedroom, a bite, a box, and a child crying in the dark. Sister Location gave us a family and machines built for horror. Pizzeria Simulator gave us fire and a speech that sounded like goodbye. Then Ultimate Custom Night gave us punishment that may never end. Help Wanted gave us a digital rabbit. Security Breach gave us a neon empire. Ruin gave us a voice that could not be trusted. The Mimic gave us a new monster made from copying the old. Each era creates its own controversial theory because each era changes what FNAF is. Early FNAF asks who killed the children and why the animatronics move. Middle FNAF asks who the Aftons are and how souls attach to machines. Late Afton era FNAF asks whether fire can free anyone. Modern FNAF asks what happens when horror becomes data, corporate nostalgia, and artificial imitation. Fans argue because the story keeps changing the kind of question it is asking, and maybe that is why the debates never fully end. A clean answer would be satisfying for a night, but FNAF's world is not clean. It is dusty, flickering, contradictory, funny, cruel, sentimental, and strange. It hides tragedy under birthday decorations and turns restaurant mascots into graves. It lets children speak through arcade games and lets killers survive as rumours, code, corpses, or copied behaviour. It makes a tiny phrase feel enormous. It makes a locked box feel like a promise. It makes a yellow bear sitting in a dark room feel like the centre of everything. As the theories settle in the mind, the controversy itself starts to feel like part of the story. The arguments, the timelines, the diagrams, the names, the dates, the book parallels, the old videos, the hidden files, the minigames, the endings that may or may not be canon, all of it becomes the larger haunted attraction around FNAF. The franchise is not only about children trapped in animatronics, it is also about ideas trapped in evidence, unable to rest because one more clue might change everything. There is also a gentler reason these theories keep returning. FNAF is built from fear, but it is also built from sympathy. People argue about Golden Freddy because they want the child inside to have a name. They argue about the crying child because they do not want his pain to disappear into a hospital monitor and a black screen. They argue about Michael because they want guilt to become action. They argue about Charlie because she is not only a victim, but the one who reached others in the dark. They argue about Elizabeth because a little girl's desire to be seen by her father became twisted into one of the franchise's most tragic monsters. Even the sharpest theory debates often begin with a soft question. What happened to this person, and can they ever rest? That is easy to forget when the conversation turns into dates, files, book continuities and timeline charts. Underneath all of that, the story is still about children who should have gone home, families that broke around secrets, machines built to smile while hiding terrible things, and adults who either caused the harm or failed to stop it. The theories become controversial because the details decide the emotional meaning. If Cassidy is the vengeful spirit, Golden Freddy becomes a monument to rage. If the crying child shares that space, Golden Freddy becomes a monument to broken memory. If Andrew fills that role, the books step closer to the centre, or one identity change can move the whole emotional weight of the story. The same is true for the mimic. If the modern rabbit is William, then the old killer truly refuses to die. If the modern rabbit is the mimic, then the old killer's pattern refuses to die. Those are different nightmares. One says evil survives as a person, the other says evil survives as behaviour, copied and sold and repeated by systems that never learned shame. That is why the argument gets so heated. Fans are not only choosing a villain, they are choosing what the new era is about. FNAF also keeps controversy alive because it rarely gives one kind of evidence alone. A theory might have visual clues but weak timeline support. Another might have book support but little game confirmation. Another might fit the emotion perfectly while struggling with mechanics. Another might solve the mechanics while making the emotion feel colder. This is why the best FNAF debates can feel endless in a strangely satisfying way. The story is not a locked room with one obvious key on the table. It is a building full of keys, and some of them open doors in other continuities. So the controversial theories are not just noise around the franchise, they are part of how the franchise has been experienced. People remember where they were when a theory changed how they saw FNAF 4, when a book introduced a concept that made an old game feel different, when a hidden file name sparked a new argument, when a trailer made everyone rethink the villain, when an ending seemed to close the story, and the next game quietly opened it again. The debates became a kind of shared memory, just almost like the community's own version of haunted objects. Old interpretations linger even after newer evidence moves past them. and now the lights in the pizzeria feel a little dimmer. The office fan keeps turning. Somewhere far down a hallway, an old camera feed flickers, and the shapes in the dark look almost familiar. We have drifted through Dream Theory, Golden Freddy, the crying child, the bites, the Afton family, the puppet, the books, the mimic, the pizzaplex, and all the strange arguments that made this series feel endless. Some theories fade, some return, some are proven wrong and still remain important because they show how people were trying to understand the mystery at the time. So let the unanswered parts stay unanswered for tonight. Let the locked box remain closed. Let the arcade screen glow quietly in the corner. Let the old animatronics rest where they can, and let the newer ones wander their neon halls without needing every shadow solved before morning. The story will still be there later, full of static, music boxes, birthday candles, and names whispered through broken machines. For now, you can let it soften into the background, like a distant security camera humming in an empty room. If you're still awake, you can carry the next mystery with you gently, without needing to chase it. I hope you sleep well, dream softly, and find your way safely through the dark. Good night.